Good afternoon. Welcome to the second webinar sponsored by the New York Metro chapter of Informs. My name is Jack Thur. I'm president of the chapter. There are a number of registrants who we haven't seen before. We're very happy to welcome you. But first, before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are, so you'll know something about us and who is bringing this webinar to you. Just going to share screen and whoops, that didn't work well. Let me try again. There we go. Informs is the premier professional association in the world for professionals in the fields of analytics, operations research, and the management sciences. Although we've recently had our 25th anniversary, the society actually goes back to the early 1950s when its predecessors were established, Operations Research Society of America and the Institute of Management Sciences. So Informs and its predecessors have been serving professionals in the field for almost 70 years. This is how we do it. Currently, the association has more than 10,000 members worldwide. It publishes 17 scholarly journals, which are peer-reviewed. It also has 13 magazines that are sent to all of its members to bring all of its members up to date on what's going on in the fields of analytics and operations research. The association has numerous conferences throughout the year on many different topics. Of course, there's the annual conference for everyone. And but then there are specialized conferences such as healthcare, practice, simulation, and other conferences as well. Informs has numerous communities that members can join, such as 19 chapters around the world, not just in the United States. You're now watching this webinar sponsored by the chapter in New York, but there are many more around the country. The purpose of the chapter is to bring people together, local in the geographic area, to get to know each other, network, and collaborate. Informs has 35 special interest groups that you can join, depending on what your specialty is and what your interest is. Examples are special interest groups in artificial intelligence, aviation, data mining, finance, practice and industry, operations research and sports, applied probability, health applications, military, optimization, transportation, and many more. An interesting thing about military applications is that operations research has its beginnings in the military during World War II. And there's a whole interesting history about that. There are also a number of fora. A forum is a group that doesn't quite fit into any of the analytical topics, such as junior faculty members, minority associations, and so forth. Informs also awards prizes and awards and certifications for those who have shown special expertise in the field. And at the bottom of the screen is the website for Informs in case you'd like to go there and learn more about the association. A few words about the New York chapter, which is bringing you this webinar. We were established in 1955, so we've been around for a long time also. We serve the greater New York metro region, and for over 40 years, we had monthly in-person meetings with a speaker. The pandemic pretty much brought that to an end, which is why we are now bringing you the latest trends in analytics and operations research via webinar. There's discussion about what our format will be when the pandemic is over. Perhaps it will be a hybrid of the two. The committee has to discuss that still. A chapter, because it's local and geographic and designed to bring people together for physical meetings, is an excellent forum for networking with others in the field and to collaborate with others who are doing similar work with you. Informs is by and large a volunteer organization. It is largely powered by thousands of volunteers who contribute their time to a better cause. And behind us is a wonderful permanent staff at Inform's headquarters, who we depend on for a lot of support, including monitoring this webinar for us. The volunteering at Informs gives lots of leadership opportunities. I started many years ago as the chapter college relations coordinator, basically reaching out to local universities and colleges. And somehow I wound up as president of the chapter. So here I am. And like I said, we're beginning webinar presentations since last year. Below is some information about contacts, but I'll be throwing up a slide at the end of the presentation with contact information in case you want to reach out to us and learn more about Informs and the New York chapter. With that said, I'm very pleased to introduce a very esteemed speaker today, Dr. Edward Amoroso. And Dr. Amoroso is currently Chief Executive Officer of TAG Cyber LLC, a global cybersecurity advisory, training, consulting, and media services company supporting hundreds of companies across the world. Ed recently retired from AT&T after 31 years of service, beginning in Unix security R&D at Bell Labs and culminating as Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer of AT&T from 2004 until 2016. Ed has been an adjunct professor of computer science at the Stevens Institute of Technology for the past 27 years, where he has introduced nearly 2,000 graduate students to the topic of information security. He is also affiliated with the Tandon School of Engineering at NYU as a research professor and the Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University as a senior advisor. He is author of 6 books on cybersecurity and dozens of major research and technical papers and articles in peer-reviewed and major publications. If during the presentation you have a question that you would like directed to Ed, at the bottom of the screen is a Q&A button. Simply click on it and type in your question. And we have someone monitoring the questions. If it seems like a good time to interject, we'll do that, ask him the question on the spot. Otherwise, we'll be saving questions, and at the end of his presentation, we'll ask all of them that you have sent to us. With that, I hand the floor over to Ed, and who will give us a fascinating talk on a cryptography-related topic.
Thank you for that very nice intro. And I appreciate you all making some time today. I'm told that you all are interested in cryptography, and that is also one of my great passions. It's something I've loved. You notice the title here. You see how the word surprisingly modest is the lighter tone there. There was a book I had in grad school by a guy named Foreman Acton, who wrote a book on numerical methods, and it was called Numerical Methods That Work. But he'd embossed onto the cover of the book the word usually, but there was no ink on it. So in order to see that it said usually, you had to hold it up. And this is my feeble attempt at really, if you squint at this, it would look like I'm saying cryptography's role in modern enterprise security. But you look more closely, I'm saying, well, it's surprisingly modest. And I hope I haven't scared a lot of people away from the talk, because this looks like I'm going to be talking about all these terrible things in crypto, but not at all. In fact, just the opposite. I think first off, if you are called to cryptography, and I don't think you choose cryptography, I think it chooses you, then you already know that. And you don't need someone like me to suggest that there may be some things that you might be interested in that could be related. So, and there's tons of absolutely essential applications that are dependent on cryptography. We'll celebrate a little bit of that in the beginning. So by no means am I, here to tell you that cryptography hasn't changed the world. In fact, when we think about the fundamental contributions that cybersecurity has made to computer science, it starts and stops with cryptography. Firewalls are not a fundamental contribution to computer science, where clearly, public key cryptography, key exchange, things like that, these are beautiful concepts that change the way the world has operated. In fact, if you wanted to ask yourself, why is Walmart smaller than Amazon? Diffie and Hellman might have something to do with that. So I'm by no means here to discount the fundamental contributions. In fact, if we just sort of look at a few faces here, I think you recognize two of them, but I'm not sure you know the third. So while I'm talking, you know with Diffie on the bottom there, and you probably know Ron Rivest. I won't tell you the one on the top right is for a minute. But when you look at the contributions that have been made, it makes one very proud to be in cybersecurity. I've had the opportunity to spend time with both of these guys on the left. And I put them in the same category as Feynman and Shannon. It's just like, it freaks me out, however, that when I talk to the two of them and say, why aren't elections done using crypto? They say, because you can't trust software. And so it's quite a terrifying prospect that, Thomas Edison and Henry Ford here are saying that we shouldn't be using software for elections. But nevertheless, you can't discount what they've done. And kind of the Bible has been Bruce Schneier's book. If you don't have it, then I don't believe you. I think you do have it. You just can't find it. It's so fat, it's hard to lose. But the picture there on the top right is James Ellis, who is probably the most underappreciated cryptographer ever lived. He worked at GCHQ, and he essentially stumbled onto public key cryptography in the classified confines of the GCHQ, and nobody really knew about him until the mid-90s, who was sort of uncovered. In fact, Whit Diffie had something to do with that he and others, Clifford Cox and others, had basically created what the two guys on the left here, won Turing Awards for. And James Ellis died unknown. The guy was like a beekeeper in the UK, so drive a little car as a civil servant. But nevertheless, it's beautiful, rich history. And for those of you who do cryptography and love it, then that's great. My dad was a computer scientist. My dad was maybe the second or third PhD in computer science ever. He was at the Moore School in 1965. He was doing a PhD in electrical engineering. They said, hey, we think this is like computer science. Can we call your PhD that? And my dad famously said, if you have to call yourself a science, you probably are not one. But nevertheless, he did it. And I remember my dad's still around, he's retired, but he always told me, don't worry about when you pick your discipline. You know, as I did my PhD, I was in formal methods. I was proving properties of computer programs. Can you imagine anything less, commercially relevant than that? But my dad always said, if you're that person proving theorems with a quill pen on paper somewhere, but they're right, and you're the right person to do it, then for God's sake, do it. That's what you're here for. Don't worry if you're going to make a lot of money. That's not the right impetus for selecting your discipline as a technologist. You pick your passion thing that's right. Just make sure you do it right and you're the right person. I think Dijkstra reinforced that as well, that's how you pick your discipline. So if you're a cryptographer, you probably already know it. Your work is important. I'm not here to discount any of that. And you'll see that I'm going to give you some examples. In fact, one of my favorite things is when you find a protocol you didn't know. And this is one that I think a lot of people haven't seen. It's right smack in the middle of Schneier's book. But like that's David Chaum on the bottom. The reason I bring him up is because David Chaum tried in the 90s to create DigiCash. And I'm not sure how many of you remember. I bet you don't remember the company, but it was quite an interesting company. You know, we yak quite a bit about Bitcoin and and I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here on blockchain in a minute. But there was like this concept of disrupting banks and disrupting the credit card industry with anonymous cash, anonymous payment. And Cham had this very cool concept. You can see it here represented in this protocol where Alice is trying to interact with Bob by sending the classic problem of, I'm going to send you a sealed envelope. You're not going to look inside, but I want you to stamp that what's inside is valid. You've heard that problem before. And on the surface, to anyone who doesn't think about that, you'd say, well, how could you possibly trust what's in the contents of a sealed envelope? So how could I possibly stamp that it says, I owe you $5 or something? Maybe you've lied and said it's really $1 million. And I stamp 5 and I debit you 5 and you make $1 million, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. Well, Chaum had this really cool idea, and it's fun for non-cryptographers to discover the joy of cryptographic protocols with this one. So what he said was, just put together a whole big batch of sealed envelopes. And they're sealed in the sense that you can't see inside it. And then give it to somebody. And that someone will then randomly select one of them and put it aside, and then open all the others to see if you lied. So statistically, if I gave you 1,000 and I just picked 999, one of them at random I put on the side, and all the others look good. It seems like you were honest in those 999. I'd go, nah, statistically, I think the other one you probably didn't lie. I stamp it, I didn't open it. It's a beautiful protocol. You don't have to be a cryptographer to appreciate that that's kind of cool. It's a really good idea. And it's represented here in notation that would probably be very familiar to a cryptographer. So again, this idea that we can discover and have fun with new protocols is enjoyable. And it's something that if you are a cryptographer, you're familiar with that. Others are not, and I'd recommend that, to the degree that you can evangelize, you should, because this is a fun activity. I've taught out of Schneier's book, and it's enjoyable. But, computer science students are kind of interesting. Like, there is a difference between computer science and mathematics. Mathematicians learn these things one way. Computer science is very different. Like when I'm training CS majors in things like blockchain, here's how CS majors think of things like cryptography. They think of it as like a GUI, like you're looking at a screen on an app or something. So for example, when you're trying to explain blockchain, they get like a little screen that shows data, and Bob gave $1 to Bill, Mary gave $2 to Alice. There's your canonical Genesis block, and you hash it, In this case, I'm showing it being hashed to the familiar 4-0 preface to the hash value there, as you're familiar with in blockchain. And when you're explaining this to like a student, the way you show chaining is these visual representations. It's the interesting way that, at least my students understand this. Here I'm showing the hash essentially chaining forward to become that additional block in the hash that I do in the second block here. Again, where I've mined the block here to 4 zeros. And then the output, that hash chains to the next block. It becomes embedded into that data, and I'm spinning the nonce. That's how you mine a block in a blockchain, and so on. You get the idea. But the point is that cryptography is something to be celebrated. It's got a rich history. It's something, if you were born to do it, you should do it. It's made fundamental changes. Certainly SSL has allowed me to buy books on Amazon. And for computer science majors, we can show them the joy and beauty of learning a protocol and seeing the cleverness, and also explain basic cryptographic primitives like distributed ledgers in ways that they can understand. So absolutely, it has its fundamental place in computing. But in 3 decades as an academic, Jack had read my bio. That must be a little older bio, because at Stevens, I've been there 31 years, and I did my PhD there earlier. So I've been in academia for many years, and at NYU now, 5 years now as a full-time research prof. I have to tell you that there's still somewhat of a hint that for many researchers, cryptography is computer security. It is cybersecurity. And that's certainly true if you do crypto research. And I'll be honest, I thought this for a while too. When I was much earlier in my career, I thought cryptography, what more is there? There's some trite things like antivirus and passwords, but this is the real beef. What I've learned, in my years at Bell Labs and AT&T, I became the chief security officer at AT&T, where I was managing a budget that was approaching, between the different businesses I had in protecting the company, as much as $1 billion of operating expense that was being allocated. You know what I learned? That in industry, the cryptographic spend and the cryptographic emphasis was a tiny subset of cyber. Now, here's why this is important, and here's why I'm appealing to all of you to stick with me here for a minute. The cybersecurity problem right now is a gigantic jailbreak. Do we go a week now without reading about a government agency, a business, a group, a political party, something that has essentially lost everything, like lost all of your data, spilled all your PII, given away health data, had a complete break-in? I mean, it's one after another after another. It is a catastrophe. It's to the point where we should be deeply ashamed as computer scientists that we've allowed this to happen. Edgar Dijkstra often made these very profound observations. And before he died many years ago, he'd said, I think he made a funny comment. John, you'll appreciate this because I know you're a physicist. He said, how is it that then he had like a Microsoft Word. He didn't like computer word processing things. He liked to write things out. But I guess he had a Microsoft Word manual or something from the era, the early 2000s. He says, why is it my Microsoft Word document is this fat, and yet my favorite book on the beauty of physics is just half as fat? Does it take more words to explain that stupid program than the beauty of physics? Yeah, I kind of had a point. Like in computer science, we are at a loss for simplicity and elegance. We've built complicated crap that this is connected to that, back-ended by this, front-ended by that. Go into any business and ask them to diagram their network for you, and they can't do it. Ask them to list their assets for you, they can't do it. Ask them to tell you which security vendors they're using. They can't do it. I started Tag Cyber, my little startup. because we help people sort of understand the vendors they use and which ones they should pick. You would think that would be the simplest thing in the world. And it's like I'm solving world hunger by helping a company figure out what companies they've bought security tools from. I mean, it's a bit of a problem. And I want to show you, like, there's this framework that we use that will give you, oh, sure. Go ahead, John.
I have a quick question.
Of course. Yes.
Cryptography equivalent to encryption is one of the questions that's been asked.
Yeah, I mean, encryption is a piece of it. Like you could argue that the exchange of secrets, that beautiful concept that Diffie and Hellman came up with, this idea that we just can be sitting in an open room, like let's say we're in a movie theater. John's on one side of a movie theater, I'm on another. And we tell everybody in the room a couple of numbers, A and B, right? And then you know what I know, but everybody else in the room knows. Then I think up a secret number. You think up a secret number. I raise one of the first numbers to the secret number modulo the second number. You do the same. We exchange the numbers. We each raise the result to our secret number. Guess what? It's the same number. And everybody in the theater can listen to that, and they can't figure out our secret number. Now, is that encryption? I don't know, I guess, but it's cool. And that's Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So it's sort of cryptography. I think cryptography, in a sense, is secret writing. That's the idea. And cryptanalysis is breaking secret writing. I spent some time on the advisory board at NSA, and I sort of learned that if you ever see a resume that says cryptology, which is cryptography plus cryptanalysis, then they worked at GCHQ or NSA, because nobody else does cryptanalysis other than the feds. But I think we often use them synonymously, but I don't think so. I think encryption is one of the more exciting parts, but there are other things that we do, key exchange and maybe all of the key management infrastructure, just the protection of secrets is a big piece of it. And that's not really encryption. That's a little broader, but it's a good question. So thanks, John. But the point here is that there's this framework that I use. I want to take you through. This is a crib sheet for if you run a security team. So think of these as cubby holes where you better have some vendors, you better have a plan, you better have something you're doing. And in a lifetime of doing this, I've come up with these 54 things that I think you better know how to do. And I'm going to circle the ones that I think are directly applicable to cryptography. And these are like all the places where we're trying to stop hacking, all those things I talked about. Notice in the first column here, nothing's circled. So deception security, that's where you drop honeypots and traps in a network to try to catch hackers. Spectacularly interesting, almost zero academic research in this area, almost nothing. There's no foundational issue, nothing. Some vendors building honeypots, some hackers who play with this, nothing. Intrusion detection prevention, that's where you're watching and matching up behavior against either predefined signatures or patterns that are generated based on behaviors or even machine learning. Nothing to do with cryptography, but a very weakly sort of supported area. It's easy for hackers to dance through intrusion detection systems. And you can see all the way down here, like web fraud, web application. These are all disciplines that have no foundational basis. There's no computer science base. There's no models. There's no research. I don't mean research as in listing, vulnerabilities. Like CVE, lists of CVEs is not research to me. And by the way, let me pause a moment. The other scourge of academia is this idea that hacking equals computer security, and that a career in cybersecurity is best initiated by learning to hack. Well, what could be further from the truth? Anybody who works in the industry knows we don't sit around hacking iPhones all day. We do other things, and it's not hacking. The skill, for example, to do application security is not a hacking skill. It's a software, that's sort of a DevOps skill, if anything, like the ability to be simple in code. I grew up in Bell Laboratories where there was this idea of software tools or simple tools that did simple things, and you put them together had the great opportunity to work with Brian Kernay. In fact, I spent some time with him recently. I did a video with him. And when we're building these early software tools and Unix, there's simplicity, elegance, correctness, economy of design. That's how you do application security. And it's not cryptography, it's that. So this whole column, here's 9 things people spend a whole boatload of money on that don't involve crypto. Here's a second column. Now, certainly public key infrastructure is important. You're going to pick a CA, you're going to have a public key infrastructure base in your company, and you would allocate some money. There's some cool companies like Venafi and Keyfactor and others that do work in this area. They're wonderful. But teeny part of your spend, look at the other stuff like stopping denial of service attacks. I mean, I think Shannon would be rolling over in his grave if he knew that the best we can do to build availability into computer security is that we just use the gateway protocols like BGP to just turn like when there's an attack on somebody, we turn the flow off to these special firewalls where we try to filter and then we on-ramp. That's the best we could do. There's no better model for stopping DDoS attacks. So there's a lot of missing research here and nobody to do it. Like it just strikes me that there's so much opportunity here and so much sort of, at least in academia, not enough attention in these areas. Like in the intrusion detection thing, there's even, I admit my bias. I tend to be somewhat progressive in my politics, but there's a lot of people who would look intrusion detection as like surveillance or user behavior analytics. That's snoopware. Oh my God, what could be more evil? But there is something to be said for collecting audit data. If John and Jack and I are on a subway platform at 2 in the morning in Brooklyn, I might be sort of happy that there's a camera there. I don't know. I got probably the last thing on my mind is they're surveilling the fact that I'm on the subway platform, and perhaps more. I hope somebody's actually on the other end of that camera watching. But nevertheless, you get the point here that in the first sort of 18 things that we've listed that we think are relevant to this discipline of cybersecurity, only one I've circled. Then this next one I'm going to circle voice, which it's not that important. Like I'm going to guess if we took a roll call of people here on our in our meeting and asked how many of you run an encrypted voice app like Silent Circle or CoolSpan, I'm going to guess it's 0. Right? Maybe I'm wrong, but I bet it's 0. And I grew up in an organization that cared deeply about voice and deeply even about voice encryption. I worked on some of those programs with the government, and certainly in the federal government, you're going to encrypt voice. I've used the stew 1,000 times. But voice security, I circled, it was not a big important part of the industry. Now you could argue, well, some of these other things certainly do have a crypto component to it. I'm hashing things in software and, in password privilege management, I'm certainly encrypting that stuff when I'm storing it. I get that, but these are minor operations that have been solved. In fact, we're trying to get rid of passwords. Passwordless experience is the goal. Let's click on the next one. Nothing circled here. Crowdsourced testing, that's bug bounty. Cyber insurance, you'll know what that is. Pen testing. Identity and access management, admittedly, that's related in some sense to encrypted kind of identity and storage and things like that. But it's really not the main issue. Identity and access management are all about these administrative and governance issues. If we continue on, and data control, certainly digital rights management is important, content security, and yes, encryption. You are going to allocate budget to encryption if you're running a program. But look, just to finish things off, these are the 54 things I spend money on. I've only circled 4, hence my first title, the title of the speech here, that when I look at this as an academic and also as a practitioner, and now as an analyst, I lean back and I must conclude that cryptography has a surprisingly modest impact here on this chart. It really does. It's not that it's not existent, and it's not that I don't appreciate Diffie-Hellman. It's not that I don't celebrate, James Ellis. And it's not that I don't think it's fun to lecture on a whiteboard about how SSL works and how Mark Andreessen embedded the cert in a browser and on and on and on and on. It's all beautiful stuff. But when you look at the present sort of profile, most of these boxes are not circled, and almost all of them are exclusively the purview of vendors. So vendors who have a commercial interest are building tools funded by venture capital to try to convince all of us that it's the way to go. Like endpoint security there, number 20. There's probably about 80 companies, maybe it's more, but I count about 80, like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, McAfee, those companies that try to secure your endpoint. And they're all out trying to convince you that their way is the way to go. And the irony is, I'll bet you half of you are watching me right now on a MacBook Pro or MacBook Air with no endpoint security on it at all. Like it's this weird, bizarre kind of, right? I mean, I don't raise your hand, but I'll bet you half of you on a computer has no, like you don't run AV on your Mac. Why? I don't know. You don't know why. There's no, it's chaos. It's not a good story. So when you read about SolarWinds, or when you read about the Democratic National Committee, or you read about the Office of Personnel Management, where maybe some of you, including me, had all of your private information that you told a polygraph examiner, stolen, or you read about Target, or you read about Home Depot, you read about Sony, that goes on and on and on and on and on. The reason is because cybersecurity is a complete mess right now. And you can quote me on that. It's like, I think that's all I do for a living. It's all I've done my whole life. And I think it's time to be ashamed that we've done a very poor job here, that we allow vendors to do the innovation. I mean, remember that picture of the scientists in 1927 at that beautiful conference that it was one in 2017 and then one in 1917 and then one in what the heck was the name of that conference? I always forget, the physics conference 1927, famous picture. It was the Solvay conference. You probably all, if you Google it, you'll see the picture. There's Madame Curie, and there's Einstein, and there's Heisenberg and Pauli, all your favorite constants in high school physics. They were all there. And, over a 40-year period, they, from 1890 to 1930, they produced such invention. They didn't use that dumb word innovation. They used invention, research and invention, science, that in around 1930, we all went, oh my God, this is incredible. Like the possibilities are amazing. Like, look where computers went from 1930 on. Look where electronics went. And then like the transistor came a decade later. And that's all from physics, that 40 years of amazing kind of contribution. But remember what happened 1940-ish or 1938, Einstein signed a letter that went to FDR basically saying, yeah, the physics is good. There's a lot of excitement, but we also might be able to create a chain reaction here that could lead to the development of some pretty spectacular bombs. We better get to work on this because we think the Germans are doing it, blah, blah, and the rest is history. So we know that 40-year period led to both promise and also potential chaos. Well, now I want to tell you about another conference, 1968. There was a conference, a NATO conference on software engineering. My dad was there. And all the great computer scientists were there. It was Dijkstra and Tony Hoare and Alan Perlis and so on, the great creators of our discipline. And in 1968, that conference was the first one that ever used the term software engineering. It was the first time anybody had ever used that term. I want you to add 40 years to 1968. What did we get in 2008? You got your first iPhone. I would contend that the period from 1968 to 2008 was just as creative, if not maybe more creative and productive in its impact on the world that may be 1890 to 1930. It's something for a bunch of nerds like all of us to debate in some Upper West Side bar. That would be a fun debate, like which had more impact on the world. And maybe you can throw Gutenberg in there as a third thing, like which was bigger, Gutenberg, physics of 1890 to 1930, or the computing advances from 1968 to 2008. I vote the third thing. I think that that's changed our world. Look what we're doing right now. We're in a pandemic. Jack and John set this thing up. We don't miss a beat. We're all together. We're talking. It's not as fun as if we were all in a classroom together, but it's still pretty good that we can do this. And why? Because from 1968 to 2008, we made advances. Now, why do I say that? Because we had the same thing happen in the mid 2000s. We went, oh my God, look what we can do. We can build cloud. We can build SaaS applications, we can do mobile apps, we can do music, we can do Netflix, we can do Uber. This is amazing, but also maybe some really terrible things could happen as well. Now, nobody wrote a letter. I actually jokingly wrote a letter to Trump saying that you better do something. I think it got to him. Now my friends all say, what do you think you're Einstein writing to Trump? And I say, well, I may not be Einstein, but he's not Roosevelt. So it seems like perfectly reasonable to write him a letter. But nevertheless, if you're thinking about why this is a big mess, well, think back to the letter that Einstein wrote to Roosevelt. He was saying, this is a mess. We've got a gigantic problem here. I'm contending that we have a similar problem in computing. Now, a lot of people are fearful of AI taking over. Like if you read Yuval Harari and so on, or Harala, I forget how to say his last name, wonderful writer. He talks to these existential problems that we deal with. Climate, totally agree, gigantic problem. Issues of racial inequality, gigantic problem. And then others would say AI and artificial intelligence, like taking over our lives. I would substitute cyber disasters as a much bigger, more existential threat. I sit on the board subcommittee for PSEG. That's the company that delivers power to New Jersey, Long Island, parts of New York. And so I've had some deep insight as part of that board community. And I will tell you that, there's a lot of fear that there are scenarios that should scare the living what out of you. Right? I mean, I'm not going to curse here, a bunch of some cryptographers, even though oddly, when we say nonce in the US, that's like a very naughty word in England. Did you ever notice that? I don't know if you knew that, but when we say nonce in crypto, that means nonsense. It's all the folks in the UK chuckle at that silly reference, but nevertheless, there are horrific scenarios. So here's my appeal to all of you. And I'm going to show you something now that's an example of orphaned research, but it's so interesting. And it's the kind of thing that I think cryptographers would take to. Like, I'm not saying give up your cryptography, but I just want to show you that, expanding your horizons may not be such a bad idea. You don't have to give up your love for cryptography. You don't have to stop teaching if you're an adjunct. You don't have to discount the work you've done. But there may be some things that have floated around. I tried to pick something old that I don't think you've ever seen. By the way, I made this presentation for you guys. This is not a presentation. I don't get invited by cryptographers often to give presentations. So I said yes when the guys asked me to do it. I said, yes, I would love to give that presentation because I get to talk about some things I never talk about in any other setting. But here's an example of something that here's what this shows. Here's what this research proved. Darryl McCullough, 1990. There's actually errors in here. I wrote to the editor of IEEE Transactions on Software Engineering, said, I found a bunch of errors in the paper, but whatever, it's still great. Here's what he said. If I have a secure system, and then I have another secure system, you would think that when I connect them together, I should have a secure network, right? Secure system, and I'm not talking about leaks all over the place. I mean, a secure system that has closure, another has closure, I connect them only to each other. And he proved that that may not be secure. That's a very cool thing. Like that should guide when we go back and look at things like this, like we're looking at network monitoring and network security and all this stuff. Don't you think that those research conclusions would be nice to guide the tools we built? Isn't that what we learned about engineering and science? Like we're all a bunch of gearheads here. When I learned, I also did physics as an undergrad, and I always learned that physics was the cement that you poured on which we did engineering. And I was proud of that. I thought that that was good. Physics is the right thing. And so what is the base of computer science? I don't know. That's why I think computer science probably is not a science. I don't know what it is. Maybe mathematics is the base. Who knows? But there's something. But the point is that this guy, I'm going to show you, it's the craziest thing you've ever seen. Where do you see the diagrams he drew? When I first saw this, I gave a talk at a conference where he presented this. I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. It took me a while to figure it out. I'll be able to explain it to you, but I almost wish you had a glass of whiskey in front of you. It would help you understand these crazy diagrams that we're going to go through here. You're going to say, what in the world? But at the end, you'll get it. Have you ever watched a movie where you didn't quite know what it was doing or where it's going, and then at the end it makes sense? That's this. So bear with me here. So first thing I'm going to show you is this diagram that might look like an Einstein time-space diagram, but it's a system. Think of it as a PC. And user A is typing commands. We're going to say sending messages, but you can think of it as just typing commands into this system. So A types a command, sends a message at time T1, does another thing, it's like that. It's interacting with this system. That's the model. And over on the other end, there's this user B. And we could assume that if this system is designed as like a relay where A does something, B sees it, then B reads the thing. You'd have a diagram sort of like that. Not a big, stretch to think of systems that might work like that. And similarly, they could be numbers, right? Like if user A sends a 0 and then a 1, then a 0, and user B sees it, big deal. But if the delta T between each of those different sends, and let's say sends and receives are atomic, I send it instantaneously, you see it, there's no time passing here. If it's 1 second, then you could say it's a 1 bit per second overt channel between A and B. Does everybody agree with that? Like go into chat here if you say that I'm all wet here, but this is baby stuff. It's just, why am I doing this? You'll see in a minute. There's nothing logically interesting about this, just that it's that kind of a thing. It's an overt. Covert channels, by the way, are when information gets from A to B, but you didn't intend that or you hadn't used it. Like when I was a kid, my sister and I shared a wall in our home. Her bedroom's over here, my bedroom's over here, my younger sister. And we had the same wall. My mother would say, all right, you kids go to bed, no talking, go to lights out, go to sleep. And we would communicate. I'd tap on the wall. I'd go tap, 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 tap. And she'd go boom, boom. And it's like kids using a wall as a covert channel. You agree? Like a wall is not a communication medium. If I called my sister on the phone, that's overt. If I yell to her, voice to ear, overt. Tapping on a wall is I'm covertly communicating using something that was not designed as a communication channel. That's important to this because really the idea here is we want to find out in a system whether A can somehow signal B. That's the security property. We want A to be able to do its work and B can't see any evidence of that, like a shared system. And A is like doing top secret stuff and B is not. That's the motivation here. We want to separate or isolate A from B. So let's create the second system X prime. It's going to behave a little differently. So flush your mind of X. We're not going to worry about that one anymore. We got a new system here, behaves differently. Here's what it does. It generates randomly and spuriously outputs that hit user B. B has no idea whether these outputs originated with A or originated with system X, X prime. There's no idea. It just sees them. So now, if I have user A doing the sending and typing, you can see what happens. If these are random messages, the number and the value of messages generated by X prime are random, then B is just going to see 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. It's the equivalent of the wall where I'm tapping, tap, tap to tap, tap, and my sister goes boom, boom. If the wall is generating tap, tap, boom, that like all this crazy noise, then I can't communicate with my sister anymore. It masks what I'm trying to send. Do you follow? And in a sense, you could say now that X prime is a deducibility secure system where the definition is B can't deduce anything from A's behavior. Do you follow? A does a bunch of crap, hoping to signal B. Back here in this old system, worked great. I send you 0, 1, 0, you get 0, 1, 0. It's a channel. It's a very reliable overt channel. This one, when I send 0, 1, 0, gosh, you see something totally different and I have no control over that. So your great channel is gone. It could be 1,000 ones and zeros in here, and your stupid 101 is, or 010 is all integrated. You'll never get it. And we would say, all right, let's define that. Let's say that's a desirable property that A cannot signal B. I can't send signals to B. Everybody with me? It's pretty simple. New system, wipe your mind to the last one. So, I told you this is crazy stuff. That's why I wanted you to have a glass of whiskey for this. A and B are now on either sides of this thing. Now, here's the way this is going to work. Excuse me, I got drinking my drink here and I've got it went down the wrong pipe. So now what's going to happen, this weird system, A is going to do a bunch of stuff. Send 101, it's going to send messages. Mysteriously, there'll be something that stops or brings an end to that. A knows to stop at some time. And when the game is over, B is notified of the parity, the odd or evenness in the number of messages that were sent. Okay, so B sees like here's 1, 2, 3 things that get sent to the system, and B sees odd. Okay, or if I do another one, the user sends 0, 1, like 2 things. It sent 2 messages. Thing ends. User B sees even. So we know that I'm signaling you. I can do an odd number of things, and you're going to see odd. I can do an even number of things. You'll see even. And if odd and even I translate to 0 and 1, then I've got another overt channel here. I'm signaling you. And right, I mean, here I do nothing, you see even. So there's an overt channel here between A and B. User A does N messages, and the parity of N gets sent to B. That is what's known as, this is not non-deducibility secure, right? It's the channel exists. This is not, by our definition before, this is not a deducibility secure system. Do you follow? This one has the overt channel. I showed you an example of one where I can signal. Then I showed you one where I introduced noise where I can't signal. And now I've introduced a system where I can signal with parity, okay? This one is kind of interesting. Like this one, we're now going to modify a little bit to make interesting for us. Now, YPrime, this one we're going to remember because we're going to connect this one to a different system and show that when we connect it, it lose all these good properties. The way this is going to work is that user A sends a bunch of messages, but the system also generates that random output, like I showed you in the second system. It's the noise, it's the wall making the weird tapping sound, but it also gives you the parity, okay? So now this combined all the things I showed you. In this one, A, does something, sends 0, 1. The system does a random number of messages. This could be 1 message as is shown on the example here, or it could be 50 messages. And then the thing stops and I see parity as B. So in this case, I see 1, 2, 3 things sent. That's odd. User B gets odd, but user A can't control this because some subset of the messages that are counted, might be all of them or might be some of them, are generated and controlled by system Y prime. User A can't signal B. B is going to see parity, but the parity counts the randomly generated noise from the system. So here's another example. I do one thing, system generates one thing, B sees even. If the system had generated 2 things, B would see odd. If the system generated 3 things, B would see even, and so on. You see, A has lost control, and hence we would say Y prime is deducibility secure. I've closed the channel, and we're closing it with noise. So I have N messages, M messages generated by the system. Parity of N plus M is provided to user B, but it's meaningless. There's nothing useful about that parity because A cannot signal anymore. Is everybody with me? Go into chat if you need me to back up here, but this should be relatively simple. This is, I'm going step by step here, and I think you guys are following. It's kind of fun, right? This is like something you never see. This is an example of research. I said earlier, it was orphaned. I thought it was great stuff. You know what happened in the mid-90s? We all got interested in World Wide Web and startups, and everybody like David Chaum, that great mathematician I showed you earlier. He went and started DigiCash. Like everybody like sort of lost their mind and tried to make money, and the research got orphaned. Now let's build another system here. I'm going to introduce a system that we're going to connect to Y prime. So this new system, this is our last one, is Z or Z. User A and B sit on either side of system Z. Here's the way this is going to work. I've taken A out of the picture here to emphasize the fact that it sort of doesn't matter in this system who's sending messages or who messages are sent to. You can think of Z as having a channel, and you'll see why I'm doing this in a minute. But here's how this works. The system sends and receives a bunch of messages. The arrows coming out of system Z are generated by the system. And the systems coming in are coming from somewhere. But would you agree this is no different than the last one? This is still deducibility secure because back here, like A trying to signal, you know, the messages coming in here, it's going to get canceled out by whatever messages are shooting out of system Z, okay? It's just the same thing. It's the same system. Parity of M is not controllable by any external source. So we would say it's deducibility secure. Now let's draw them next to each other. I put user A back in here. All I did now is I drew system Y. This is exactly what I drew before, but I had user B seeing parity. And then I drew system Z, and I just put user B up here. Do you agree? Like all I did is I just moved this and this. Like here's the two systems taken together. This is just a cut and paste of what we had before. Watch user B here when I click. I just moved it. I didn't change anything. That's the one we said was deducibility secure. And Z is, these are two systems we agreed were secure. I connect them in a logical way. B sees both of these things. So now, what else might I do? Well, you see those M messages in the bottom? Let's just connect that stuff up. Why not? Doesn't change anything. So now anything leaving Z hits Y prime, and anything leaving Y prime hits Z, and we're going to assume that it's instantaneous. There's no travel time. There's no transmission time. These are instantaneous. You can't, these are atomic events in a sense. So look at that cool diagram. This is a network now. I've got Y prime, man, we said that sucker was secure. Z, we said, boy, that's secure. I just hooked them up. There's no hackers anywhere. There's not new channels. There's no new users here. It's just the same thing I had before, just hooked together. So certainly A shouldn't be able to signal B. Would you agree? That would be your intuition. The US federal government did this thing called the Red Book many years ago that was built on the Orange Book, which was also many years ago. And the Red Book said if your Orange Book secure and another thing's Orange Book secure and you hook them together, that the result must be secure. And this actually disproves that. A lot of work went into something that could have been avoided by having some research. We don't have research in this. So let's play through some games here. Where do you see the magic that pops up here? It's hard to believe. When you see this, you're going to go, wow, how could that be? So let's play some games here for A. So this is our new system. We're going to call it YPrime composed Z. That's our network. Let's do something where user A does nothing. And the systems generate nothing. That's certainly valid, right? They do nothing. Everybody does nothing. If you do nothing, then user B is going to see even at both places. Zero activity is an even parity. So this is fine. So A knows if I do nothing and the two systems happen to do nothing, user B is going to see even. Now, what if a whole bunch of stuff happens between Y prime and Z? What if they're sending things back and forth? Well, we know that anything that leaves here is also logged here. And anything that leaves here is also logged here. Would you agree that whatever contributes to the right channel of Y prime will be contributing equally to the left channel of Z? These will always be even. I don't mean even parity, they'll be the same. So would you agree that if user A does nothing, there's no way for the two parities to be different? You see that? If I do nothing, then either it's going to be nothing happens, 3 things, 4 things, 5 things, it could be odd. Whatever happens is going to be logged the same between Y prime and Z. And you say, uh-oh, that suggests that if A just does nothing and tells B, hey, listen, when I do nothing, that means the parities are going to be the same. But if I do an odd number of things, or if I do one thing, then guess what? Y prime is always going to count one more here than Z. So these will be, here you see the same amount here, but I've thrown things out of kilter here on the left by sending one message. So now I know if I do a 0 or even number of things, the parities will be the same. If I do an odd 1 or odd number of things, the parities will be different. Guess what? I've got a channel here and security doesn't compose. Isn't that cool? Like this is research. This is not, you're not going to go build a product with this. I get that. For the same reason that when you're doing, an awful lot of work that goes on in a physics lab is not going to translate to some startup. But my point here is simply that there's a lot of really interesting problems that are not being solved. They're not even being addressed. I know there's maybe a question here. Let me make sure I get it. Okay. So here's my appeal to you. Number one, if you were born to do cryptography, if you were a child savant in mathematics and you could do long division in your head, and you either work at NSA as a cryptanalyst or you do crypto, then keep doing it. There's a need, there's a market, it's important. It's one piece of the puzzle. So I wouldn't argue anything but, and also my dad's comment that if you're that great cryptographer with the quill pen and you're producing beautiful new concepts in cryptography as part of your academic work or part of even at work, keep doing that. That's important. The world always benefits from something that's correct and sincere and right. That's good. But if you think, hey, I want to make a difference to the world, I'm outraged that nation states go after each other. I'm outraged that 40 years of great, we would call it innovation, from 68 to 2008. Yeah, it produces good thing, but I'm annoyed that we've got this problem and it needs to be solved. I hate to tell you, but I would contend that you're going to get more bang for the buck in your work by maybe expanding your horizons a little bit. And that's why I titled the speech what I did, that it is a surprisingly modest impact. It's not zero. I'm not discounting the fun and intrigue and interest and contributions, but a lot of you really are interested in making a fundamental contribution and solving this problem. And the truth is that the bigger bang for the buck is going to come in other areas. And that's why I showed you the other research. I had a feeling you might enjoy that. You know, I'm not going to show you firewalls and stuff like that. You're all seen that, but I want to show you some things you probably never saw before and show you that there's a lot of opportunity. So guys, I'm going to turn it back. I'm happy to take comments or questions or discussion.
Yeah, Ed, there are a few questions.
Sure.
Or if you take a look at the questions, I think you can see them
Let's see if I can find Q&A. Yeah, there we go.
there. Some
Gotcha.
of one of them you answered, and then there are 3 more.
Let's start at the bottom.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I understand you view cryptography as a small set of cybersecurity. True. Your table of areas for cryptography is important to control the volume, money at risk, e-commerce. Yes, of course. I'm not saying that that there's no purpose for cryptography, and certainly cryptographic applications to e-commerce and payment and so on are going to be important. Digital currencies. I'm just maybe in a weird way. Maybe I'm a dad, so I've got 3 kids and I advise them on careers. So maybe there's a little bit of my dadness coming out here, but it's not like that. I don't think there's going to be a lot of jobs and opportunities there. Like, it just feels like a much narrower need. And there's some great cryptographers that can solve this. This is not the thing that keeps me up at night thinking, how are we ever going to get cryptography to solve these problems? But I can think of 100 other areas where I have no idea how we're going to solve it. So it doesn't change my view. It just points to the fact that lots of things are important. It's like if you were a bunch of kickers on a football team and I say, you need the kicker, and you say, I want to have the most consequence to professional football possible. And I come on and I said, look, kicking is important, but there's a lot of other positions. Have you considered it? You know, it's sort of like that. So that was sort of the message that I knew this was uncomfortable, and I've never given this talk before. So a little bit of personal risk here, but I do believe it. I've known this for a while, and I advise graduate students and I help them with their master's and PhD and other things. I advise them. And when they come to me and say, I'm interested in this or that, if they say cryptography, then I usually want to know, is it coming from their gut? Were they the child savant? Then I say, but if you can do long division in your head, you should do it. But if they say, well, I have a lot of interest and I want to make an impact, I hope you don't get mad at me when I say this, but I steer them away from crypto.
Thanks, Ed.
Let's see if there's other questions here.
Yeah, at the
Is
top
cryptography
there.
encryption? That was asked. That was good.
Yep.
Remark. Yeah, and I'm sorry. You know what? I was monitoring chat. I forgot there was a Q&A button there. It's weirdly on this thing. Chat shows when there's something, gives you a little number. Q&A, if you're listening to open, it doesn't show that there are any. What I should have done is clicked on answered, and then I might have seen the little number there. That's why I wasn't ignoring you guys. I just thought it was 0. But if anybody's got a question, come off mute and make sure I've answered. If you took the time to sit here with us for an hour, you have every right to ask a question. But I certainly wasn't ignoring anybody. Anything else? I want to thank you for inviting me. I had a lot of fun. It was good. I hope I get a chance to give the talk again to somebody.
Well, Ed,
Likely.
I'll throw in a question.
Sure.
It seems like as computers become more and more powerful, the existing cryptography algorithms seem to get broken all the time. And it's just there's a constant need to upgrade them and make them more and more secure, as if there is no end to this process. So isn't there a lot of research opportunities, develop RSA2 or whatever?
couple of answers to the point that you bring up. First off, you're alluding to a cryptographic inventory problem, like there's all these, there's crypto deployed all over the place, needs to be found and upgraded and so on. The cryptographic lifecycle management challenge of finding your cryptography is a problem in digital asset management and inventory and discovery. And there's some nice tools, like you might have heard of El Gamal. He's a pretty famous name attached to some work. He's an investor in a company called InfoSec Global in Canada. And you know what they do? They find your crypto. Like you put an agent on a server and it checks around and tells you, hey, I think you got crypto here and here. Like, you know, when you download some open source thing and then there's a vulnerability report or CVE in some crypto and you go, like OpenSSL, remember everybody's like, wow, do I use that? And you go, I don't even know where to start. Like, do we have that in our infrastructure? I don't know. You go look over here, you look over there, and everybody's looking around to see if the crypto needs to be upgraded. That kind of problem is a gigantic problem, but that's not the kind of problem cryptographers want to work on. That's a boring inventory thing. So it's, should you research? There's definitely. Now, the other problem is quantum, right? Like, I'm surprised that didn't come up. It's related to what you're saying, that we are going to have to upgrade. And one approach to quantum is go find all the crypto and upgrade it. We know we're going to eventually have to do something, but I think there's already evidence that there's some good quantum proof algorithms. Some folks will invent them. There's already evidence that they've well on their way. And then we'll just upgrade to that. Then the problem becomes a system administration problem of uninstalling and installing new software and getting it to work and getting the secrets management working. That looks more to me like Unix system administration than cryptography. So all these types of things, like even the last question asked by one of the earlier, one of the listeners about e-commerce and currency and payments, the problem is not the cryptography. The problem is integrating the software and doing the public key infrastructure, registering, keeping track of secrets, making sure certs don't expire. That's kind of boring day-to-day stuff. I've done it for decades. And I can tell you, it's akin to making sure your credit cards aren't hacked, or that your software is up to date, or that your desk is clean and you know where everything is. It's that kind of a feeling and skill set to making cryptography work in the context of some application area. So that's what I mean when I say the things you learn in school around crypto and the joy and enjoyment of cryptography, they translate to a very surprisingly modest component of the day-to-day work, even in PKI, even in cryptography. It's the kind of thing, Jack, that you're alluding to. It's finding, upgrading, fixing, that those are application and system administrative tasks. And it's that kind of skill set that's usually applied to that challenge. So good question.
Thanks, Ed. There are a few more questions.
Oh, good. Oh yeah, I do see a little 3 there. Now
Okay.
I'm tuned into the right channel here. Let me see if I can see in the top of the bottom. I don't see anything new here. Maybe I've got something wrong. Answered.
It's look at open.
Open. Oh, I
Open.
got it now.
Yeah.
Oh, how important are prime numbers? Man, I'll tell you, a week doesn't pass that I don't listen to a startup where the founder comes from a great university. Sometimes it's Oxford, sometimes it's MIT, sometimes there's great places where they've come up with this beautiful way to generate prime numbers. In terms of the integrity of the cryptography, it's gigantically important. In terms of kind of the market need and so on, it's a very niche area. Like there are a few places where this has some economic viability. And God, I hate that I'm sitting here talking about business so much. But let's face it, you want to change the world? I can't think of a big hack that came to be because the prime number generator sucked, right? I can think of a lot of academic discussions where the prime number generation algorithm created a weakness. But Target didn't get hacked because the prime number generator was an issue. So it's good stuff, but it's not all that viable. See, Doug asking about operations research. I'm not an expert in OR. and I know you all are, that's going to be for you guys to determine. I mean, let's face it, industrial control has massive, interconnections with cybersecurity. And I would imagine that many of the operations research problems that you guys work on have their cyber equivalent. I recommend you do it. Go figure out where that is and make that contribution. But I would be horrified to even say a word in front of all of you about OR. You guys forget more in 10 seconds about it than I'll ever know. The next one's spoke a lot about academics. I've seen the lack of research in cryptography as a leak in the business. Yes, there's no research in cryptography. I think that's informed of how it actually works in practice. And I go to the cryptographers panel at RSA and I sit there, only because I feel like gawking at these people that I admire so much. I sit and I understand the first 10 minutes and then I'm lost for an hour. There's something nice about that. I sort of like sitting there and have no idea what the hell they're talking about. I still sit there because I just admire it the way you'd admire a painting. I have a PhD in what essentially applied mathematics, and I can't understand what they're talking about. I'm looking around, and I'm sure they don't either. It's probably 2 PhDs that maybe are working in that area that get it. But that's not meaningful research unless it's really contributing to something. But here's what I do think is important. And I mentioned earlier that I sat on the advisory board at NSA, which is the golden, golden gate into the best cryptography in the world. The great cryptographers can and should be advancing the field. You just don't need legions of people to do this. You need a few, like with Diffie, Marty Hellman, and arguably Ralph Merkle, the 3 of them, contributed more to cryptography than the rest of the 8 billion of us on the planet right now. I mean, those 3 guys did more than all the rest of us, and it's true. Maybe I'll throw Rivest, Edelman, and Shamir in there, and maybe a couple others, Al Gamal, 10 people, and then the other 7.999 billion. So it's not, but that's not true of all the other stuff I showed you, like network monitoring and doing cloud security. These are wide open, and you worry about it every time. Like, is there any security on this Zoom session other than the passwords we used? Do you know? Like, I sort of do, and I think it's okay. I've blogged that there's risk, but it shouldn't be enough to not do this talk. But let's say John and Jack and I were talking about IBM's earnings next quarter. We sure wouldn't be doing it on this Zoom. Now, why is that? Well, that's an involved question. How do you fix that? It's not cryptography that fixes that problem. There's system security issues, and there's no foundational stuff. Like the thing I showed you was a foundational thing that proves you can't just assume when you slap 2 secure systems together that the network is secure. It's a great thing to have in your head. So you don't make a dumb design decision. You don't make that stupid claim in a design meeting where you're building something important, like the nuclear power controls, the place where I work. So that's the point. Research is not happening here. Let's see, can you talk about any research or practical solution dealing with insider threat? Yes, millions of things going on in insider. Here's what's happened. So first off, we all noticed when we were working in the 1980s and 1990s in a local area network in a building, like my dream growing up was to work in one of those big, beautiful office buildings in suburbia. Like I got a job at AT&T and died and went to heaven, parked in a big parking lot, walked into a gigantic building, had a little cubbyhole office, worked in their room with all these Unix experts, went to the cafeteria, stayed in the building all day, got in my car, drove home, died and went to heaven. That's what I wanted, because growing up, that was the American dream. Kids today, they would say, oh my God, I wouldn't want that at all. Like I want to work from home, I work in the Starbucks, I want to open work environment. And what's happened is that local area network that had a firewall around it has been busted wide open. And now everybody's kind of not an insider anymore. We call it zero trust. we're all connected. Like right now, are we insiders to this Zoom? What does that even mean? So it's weird that the insider problem by definition has gone away, but the main way we've solved the problem of not trusting people, like if I don't trust Jack, then what you do is you install this snoopware, we call it user behavior analytics, on his computer. And I keep track of how many times he's looking at LinkedIn per hour. Now, what he then does is goes and buys a MacBook Air that I don't know about, gets a Gmail account, and goes off and creates a shadow environment where he does that part of his life when he's not. It's weird. So it's this weird cat and mouse. And there is quite a bit of research. Like the main, more interesting work is using artificial intelligence to try to predict patterns that are indicative of an insider attack. It's interesting. It's not my cup of tea, frankly, but it's interesting. And when I was running a big enterprise program, and I was doing it in bank, I used to be on the board of directors of M&T Bank, and this was a big thing at the bank. You know, tellers and people who are talking to customers have a reasonable expectation that they're being watched. Would you agree? Like us working, like if you're doing software development, you don't want anybody snooping on you. But if you're a teller and there's a terminal and you're doing things on the terminal, to tell you that there's behavior analytics watching to make sure the transactions look good, are you aghast at that? No. So that kind of insider control, I'm very much for. And at the bank, I was for it. But yes, tons and tons of research. And now I see Saad saying, thanks, took a course in cryptography, and the class concluded on how countries with the biggest prime numbers have the best national security. I don't know, maybe that's right. Maybe that's one of those weird, connections that maybe there's some meaning there. I don't know, but that is funny. Privacy utility trade-off. Wow, again, I'm not a privacy expert. I think that is it called surveillance capital from that wonderful professor at Harvard. I've forgotten her name. Shoshana Zuboff. That is, oh man, is that a book? If there was, like, do we have Pulitzer Prizes for gearhead books? If not, there should be. That's one to buy now. I'll warn you. I think it's 1,000 pages. So if you're going to buy it, then make sure you make it your summer reading for the entire summer. But the privacy trade-offs and so on that's somewhat mystifying to me. Again, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to offer anything more than the observation that my kids are examples of people that are horrified by any kind of centralized surveillance. And yet on Facebook and Instagram, I can learn essentially everything about them, including their sexual preferences and, who they're attached to. And it's like, what? So serve up all this stuff on social media on their left hand, and on the right hand, complaining about privacy issues from government. So I plead, I have the same opinions as any other citizen. I don't have much training in privacy, so I tend not to want to serve up an opinion other than just to say, if we were having a beer together, I'd tell you my opinion, but it's not informed by anything more than just proximity because I do security. Let's see, did we get them all? I think we got them all. Again,
Looks like it.
Yeah, we got them all.
Thank you, Ed.
Happy to, always happy to answer questions. John, Jack, thank you for inviting me. I had a very delightful afternoon
Well,
for
Ed,
me.
Thank you, Ed. It was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I myself found it most intriguing and interesting, and it actually opened the mind somewhat to things I hadn't thought about. So thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you. And with that, I'll simply put up a slide with some contact information in case anyone wants to reach out to us. And if afterwards, if someone has a question they didn't think of, while we had Ed here, send the question to me and I'll pass it on to Ed and get an answer back to you. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good evening, and I'll put up a screen for, let's see. Which one is it going to be? Oh, I think this one. Yeah, here we go. That's the website for the New York Metro chapter. Please go there and see what we do and look at some of our past presentations over the last many years. And then there's my email address. If you have any questions, if you want to know more about informs, or if you have another question for Ed, send it to me and we'll get an answer back to you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a good evening.